Hey everyone, I'm Sue O'Connell. Welcome to another edition of Lunch Hour Live. You've heard the term code switching. That's when students of color find themselves acting or speaking differently to fit in with their white peers. Well, there's a new documentary, Code Switching, Race and Identity in the Suburban Schoolhouse. It explores the lives of past and present METCO students and how pursuing educational opportunity often comes at the cost of one's mental health and staying true to yourself. We're going to talk about this film today, but first, let's take a look at a clip, what you can expect on code switching.
Ever since that first bus ride, I started asking myself, why do I have to go so far away in order to get a high quality education? Like, why? I don't understand.
We are a group of minority students going to these white suburban towns, hoping for a better education.
And you leave people with a needle in their arm at 5 o'clock in the morning, ride the rest of the way to bus out to Lexington and you're in school with a bunch of white kids and white teachers.
You would go from the inner city to an affluent school system.
The whole experience gave me one vital thing, how to deal with other people that were different from you.
People have all these stereotypes about us. Like when they'll start a beat, expect you to rap, but that just wasn't me.
There was a point where it was like having two Fatimas. I feel like a weird disconnect, like I don't fit in either spots.
When I'm out in Weston, I try to make sure that I speak as well as I can because I don't want to be that black. Whatever the majority image is, that's what the standard is. Yeah. And so everyone look pale-skinned, blonde hair. I am not that.
When I wear my natural hair out, I feel like I get less likes than when I do if my hair were to be straightened. I felt very vulnerable and exposed. My depression was most severe between my 8th grade and 10th grade years. Throughout that period of time, I tried to attempt suicide 12 times.
I felt like the only time I existed in the classroom was in February, and when we decided to learn about the Civil War and slavery. You mean to tell me that's the only time I exist?
It was like we lived two lifestyles.
You live two different
You know, you lived your home, hood, black, whatever you want to call it, your city life and dealing with you and me and everybody like us. And then you get on a bus, drive 20 miles, and bang, it's a whole nother world.
It's taken me so long to realize that I'm just one person. If I don't know all the street language or I don't portray myself as the stereotypical black girl in school or at home, they don't like me because I'm not like them. It's just hey, throw the deuces up.
Today I'm joined by the folks behind Code Switching, Race and Identity in the Suburban Schoolhouse, Director Jonathan Schwartz and producer Mike Maskell. Welcome to Lunch Hour Live. Great to see you both.
Thank you.
Want to tell you, don't forget, you can send us your comments and questions via Facebook and YouTube. We'll try and answer them throughout the show. Jonathan, I want to just start by sort of setting the table a little bit. Can you explain what METCO is and why it was born and it exists?
Sure. METCO was born actually about 8 years before the quote-unquote busing crisis. METCO was born to address the poor education in many, not all, of the Boston public schools, and the desire on the part of some suburban schools for a more integrated classroom.
One of the challenges and one of the things you explore in the film, Jonathan, is that METCO generally regarded as a good thing. And Mike, we're going to talk to you in just a second about your experience. There's usually a higher graduation rate, the retention rates for students of color, more getting into college. But your film makes an argument that there are some nuances to those statistics and some serious trade-offs. What are they? I'm not hearing folks. You want to jump in?
Sure. Yep.
There we go.
Well, it does. The film asks the viewers, and it asks a lot of the members that are involved in the program to consider, beyond the stats around the educational success around the integration, but it really asks them about the impact, the long-term impact of the program itself, the psychological impact of those involved, and whether or not they came out on the long end feeling better about themselves and feeling better about the actual experience.
What school did you go to, and what neighborhood or were you living in at the time? Like,
Sure. Well, I attended the Lexington public school system starting in the 3rd grade, so that was about 1974. At the time, I was living in Boston in Lower Roxbury, but by the time I finished the program, I was living in Dorchester, in various neighborhoods throughout Dorchester. But about an 9-year span for me.
Jonathan, the other kind of level on this too, which is, the more things get better, right, the more complicated things also become. And we're going to talk a little bit and look at some clips of sort of current students just graduating from METCO and some of the original students, the OS as I'll call them. But the layer of social media and all of the sort of 24/7 branding that students are almost required to do and teens are required to do. You talk about the sort of extra level of stress that adds on students of color within these environments that are mostly white.
Oh, we would hear stories about white students FaceTiming the METCO students during Black History Month, asking them for questions, on the Civil War and Black history, expecting them to be, representing their culture, their history, So when you say 24/7, it was literally almost 24/7. It didn't stop when they got home in the evening.
Mike, you're not only the producer, but as we mentioned, you've experienced this. What was it like telling this story today in this world from an experience that you had at such a formative young, you're just a baby, when you started experiencing this METCO experience in the suburbs?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I'm still involved in the METCO program. I've never disconnected, through all these years, but, only recently have I had a real heart to heart with myself, kind of just reflecting on, my personal experience, and then speaking to a lot of the kids that I went to school with, who are adults like me now, and just kind of collectively gathering that data and looking back on what this experience really meant to us. You'll find that a lot of these kids who are in the program now, their parents were in the program, and they continued to put their kids into the program. So they did find some value in it in that regard. But there's a lot more lessons to be learned from our mutual experiences.
Yeah, the METCO program, as we mentioned, has been around since 1966. And while, as we're talking about, a lot has changed since then, METCO students then and now share similar experiences of being Black at a predominantly white school. Here's a look at what going to the school looked like from the perspective of the older METCO generation.
You meet people, they ask about your background, because they're like, huh? What do you mean you grew up in the city, went to school in the suburbs? It was a program called METCO. I always get up at 5:30, 5:45 in the morning, and then get on the bus, and you got to go through the city, and then hit the highway. And they would look at me like I was crazy. They were like, why did you do that? I was like, because the education system in Boston was horrendous.
Not all Black kids were fortunate enough to get in METCO. There was a waiting line, because you did have parents that wanted their kids to have a better education, or what they perceived to be a better education.
So my mom is actually the person who got me into the METCO program. My mom had heard through the grapevine, like there's this thing called the METCO program. It takes inner city kids to other schools. My dad was born and raised in Sierra Leone, and he came here after a civil war.
But then you go to Lexington, there's these other kind of white kids. They're just ignorant towards you because there's not Black people around them. You know what I mean? They're going by the news.
Well, to me, the Lexington white kids were curious.
They were, well, yeah, right.
Yes. What do you eat for dinner?
Right.
Yeah.
You have a backyard?
Yeah.
I got that a lot.
Yeah. You really got a backyard? And they're more inviting because you're right, because they're curious.
They're just curious.
Like you're really human beings like us. You eat chicken.
You had good folks.
Yes.
You had good folks, parents that actually pick you up and take you into their house. And when they first meet you, they're so standoffish because they watch the news.
Yeah.
And you actually from Roxbury? They don't know nobody from Roxbury. It felt like we were coming from a dangerous, dangerous, dangerous place. And you're letting these dangerous people come out here and go to school with our kids.
With our kids, yep. And then bring me, you want them to come in my house.
But then it turns into love.
Yeah, it does.
And that was so strange to me, where you would go to somebody's house and their mama would scramble you eggs. Now we all underage.
Mike, I want to talk a little bit about what your day as a METCO kid was like. And I also want to note for folks maybe new to the area, the Boston of the 70s and the 80s was not quite the Boston that it is today. That, obviously we still struggle with violence and obviously the inequalities, but it was a much grittier experience to be in Boston in the 70s and 80s. But I want to talk about your day as a METCO kid. What time did you get up? How long was your school day? What happened if you missed the bus?
Oh, yeah, I was known for missing the bus, so I can tell you all about that. The day was early. We started at about 5:30. You had to go out there even in the winter months and catch that school bus. Sometimes you had to wait 30 minutes, 45 minutes before that bus arrived at your stop. The day was long. It was usually a 12-hour day, especially if you're involved in any extracurricular activities after school. But I always kind of categorize my experience like this. There's the elementary experiences, the middle school, and there's the high school experience. But coming into the program at the elementary level, very shy student, very shy. I mean, I was probably challenged with being the singular, black focal point for so many of my classmates from the suburbs. Right. I mean, these were suburban kids thirsty for information. They weren't going to go into the city, so the only information they gathered from the city was the conversation that they had with me, which was quite interesting.
Yeah, so you carried a double burden. Not only, were you a person of color, but you also were the city expert at, when you were just a kid. And I want to ask you too, this term code switching obviously is new to our vernacular, but it's certainly a behavior that has existed for a long time. What did code switching look like for you, Mike? What did you do?
The first thing you learn is you're definitely living in two different worlds. And the first thing you have to do is adjust quickly, in different environments. So even coming back into the city at the end of the day, there was a bit of a hardening transformation that you go through. As soon as you get off that school bus, you're back. At least for me, I was in some environments that probably weren't the most safe growing up. So I had to have more of a protective shield. On the other hand, going out into the suburbs, it was very important to acclimate to that new space. How quickly can you adapt to, what was going on in the suburban community and be relatable? So matter of code switching in that regard was about being, accepted or having a sense of belonging as quickly as possible.
Jonathan, I want to ask you, that's my dog scratching, of course, behind. We knew that was going to happen at some point because you both cursed me with that, but talking about it before the show. Jonathan, I want to ask you about the METCO program in general. I mean, it's been around for as long as I can remember. And we have the same issue, right? We've got kids that we're saying deserve a shot, but they can't get the shot in their own school. So we're putting them on a bus and sending them miles and miles away for these ridiculously long days. This is inequality, and the systemic racism continues. What's a long-term solution? What do we do about this?
The long-term solution is improving the Boston public schools. The short-term solution is improving the experience with the wonderful METCO program for the young folks involved in the program. That means more Black teachers, more Black substitutes, more Black studies. That means more dialogue between white suburban parents and students and the METCO students. So there can be more discussions about the insipid racism, the stereotypes. I think in Mike's day, it was a question where people were fairly ignorant about what went on in the inner city. Now, I think in the suburban experience, everyone thinks they know so much about the inner city, from films and media and music. And what struck me is the tremendous amount of ignorance, and these forms of polite racism, even on the part of the METCO advocates in the suburbs. The good news is a lot of it can be dealt with through dialogue. As you could see, from our film, it was such a relief for Ricky and Fatima and Candace to talk about this stuff, which is where it begins.
Right, and I also was struck at some point feeling the heaviness of the oh my gosh, we're still making these same mistakes, but listening to recent students and long-term students talking about the positives that came out of METCO. And as you mentioned, one of the other challenges, of course, is representation in the classroom. Not only are they often the only students of color, but rarely do they have a teacher who looks like them, which in most cases we know makes a huge difference. Let's take a look at this clip.
I always knew that people were talking shit about us behind our backs. The only time that we could call them on it is if they actually said it to our face. But now that there's Instagram, Facebook, chitty chitty bang bang, all these different things, I could say whatever I want, and it's your job to get comfortable with my offensiveness rather than my job to be careful about offending you at all.
I'm on all of those sites. I'm friends with people from my school on those sites. It's kind of weird to see like the differences in likes. I hate to make it about likes, but like the differences in likes between the Black girls pages and like the popular white girl pages. The good things about the METCO program are you do get an opportunity to go to a great school. You get exposed to what the higher education world is like.
The literature focuses on all the great stuff, and it's great stuff. The high college acceptance rates, the standardized test scores, the SAT scores, the graduation rates, all of that is fantastic, but the literature is not nuanced.
I've seen one Black substitute in my school for the 4 years that I've been going there. We don't have enough resources to help us when we are struggling through school. Also, I think that they're using us just to have that little spark of diversity. I'm one of 6% in my school. What made you decide to become a teacher?
There's just something so powerful about, getting the free reign of teaching Malcolm, Marcus, Martin, Mandela, and Assata Shakur, and Afeni Shakur. I did not want to be a teacher until I went to Spelman College. That was the first time that I'd ever been in an educational setting and felt home. Like, to see yourself reflected in all of your teachers, to see yourself reflected in your curriculum, to see yourself reflected in everybody that's around you. It's kind of like, wait a second. Why am I now just feeling this at 18, 19, 20? And I made the decision my freshman year. I was like, okay, I have to be what I wish I had, which was someone who looked like me, teaching me things that mattered to my identity.
Mike, one of the things that's amazing about young adults and teens today is that, we started taking their picture while they were in the womb, and now they basically have their own broadcast facilities, through social media. But I'm wondering, they're dealing with these heavy issues and things that are very difficult to talk about. Was it hard for you to get them to open up while you were making the film? What was it like to help them evoke these hard feelings that are hard to talk about?
Well, the way you bring up the hard feelings is you find some commonality. So having gone through the experience myself, I know the triggers. I know the common experiences that are true in just about every METCO student. So, I mean, that was the easy part. The interesting part about Fatima, she brought up is a statistic, right? Being one of 6%. And as you move on, unless you're going to an all-Black college, for the most part, your work life and your college life will continue to reflect that same, percentage in the data. So it's more of a question of, how comfortable you are in different environments, being your authentic self as you go through that process, because this is just the beginning of an opening to a more complex world.
Yeah, it was fascinating to me to think about the sort of the loss and the positives that METCO brings. And Jonathan, I'm just wondering, was there anything that you learned from these younger students? Were you surprised with how much they had in common with the METCO vets and METCO original METCOs? Or were you impressed that things do seem to be incrementally getting better in some ways?
Absolutely both. So I was I wasn't prepared for the level of revelation that was coming out of the young students. I wasn't prepared for their exuberance about METCO and how much they love METCO and love their schools and, you know, enjoyed the school spirit, but how much trauma and pain they were also suffering. Uh, all of this was unexpected. Um, and also in speaking to the older generation, um, a lot of them had kept, you know, some of their pain and hardships to themselves for, you know, 10, 20, 25 years, including, you know, issues revolving around dating and, you know, their own gender issues. Um, you know, so yeah, it was all a big surprise.
Yeah, Mike, I was also struck by how the METCO students and, you know, tell me if this is your experience, reminded me a bit of the kids who grow up, American kids who grow up because their parents are diplomats or they grow up out of the country for a short period of time and then they return, right? And they are neither of Canada or of America because they've grown up as this sort of other, right? And have a hard time finding their community. And that seemed to me also a commonality between the current METCO students and the originals. Is that somewhat what your experience was like?
You know, part of the hardship, you know, it's a mixed bag, but part of the hardship is just kind of coming to the realization and the clarity of what you're really up against out there. So yeah, that is true. I mean, I found as I evolved even into high school, you know, going through middle school, playing sports, getting acclimated to the community, that I was just starting to peel down that layer of understanding, you know, what was really going on in these different communities, and it was an eye opener. I'm sure kids even after me have gone through the same process and the same progression through their years and the experience.
Jonathan, I want to talk to you a little bit about making the film because, you know, what I'm loving so much right now is the opportunity filmmakers have with animation because it's easier to do now than it used to be. And one of the ways you keep the story going and making it vibrant is with these sort of animated versions of the shots and a great mixture of old clips from the 70s, the gritty clips, and then the taking a look at where the neighborhoods are today. What kind of, is it an exciting challenge right now to be a filmmaker with so many sort of accessible tools to make it and tell a story?
Making this film was an extended dinner party. It was an extended family production. And the whole process, we had so many young people involved in making the animation. We had so many young people involved in creating the music, the soundtrack. Most of the soundtrack was original. So constantly, you know, the editorial aspects were fed through the artistic aspects, were fed through the social aspects. You know, and everyone enriched each other. Everyone called each other out. And that's what made making this film in particular very exciting.
It really was exciting to watch. And I'm asking and wondering, and for both of you, I want to go back to social media again because it's sort of like the the other place students live, especially right now during the pandemic time. How are students managing code switching on Instagram or on Twitter? Do they have multiple accounts where they face a certain audience or face a certain community, or is that just a challenge on trying to integrate your authentic self? What are they telling you?
My experience, through making this film and as a parent, they don't really have multiple accounts. They have accounts that they focus on, that they like to project their identity on. And to a certain extent, the whole process of code switching and creating identity has to take place online. And they feel a need to be nimble in terms of recreating and searching for their authentic selves online. So, it's endless.
Mike, what's the one thing you hope folks learn after watching the film?
Well, I hope they have some empathy. Most importantly, most of the feedback that I got through the years, and you can still see it even on social today, is that feedback where they say, "Well, I just don't understand. I just don't understand. I don't understand where that other person's coming from, or why, they feel that way, or why they're so passionate about that subject." Empathy, just simple empathy.
Jonathan, what are your thoughts on that?
Empathy and compassion and dialogue. Just, using films like this, opportunities like this to get young people and policymakers, because, we think METCO is great. One of the greatest aspects of Greater Boston. But, there just needs to be more of the stakeholders get together more often, and we'll have a brighter future.
I know folks can watch Code Switching tonight on GBH2 at 9 p.m. Any other places that they can watch?
Through libraries with a distribution platform called Canopy. New Day Films is our educational distributor. And Code Switching Movie is the website.
Great. Thank you, Jonathan and Mike, so much for joining me. Thank you for sharing your experiences with us. It's great to meet you both. A great film. Thank you and congratulations on it.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you as well.
I want to thank everyone watching on Facebook and on YouTube. Appreciate you as well. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you soon.